Just do a simple thing that anybody can do at home and interesting for everyone who hasn't seen it. So thanks, Andrew, for being here again. Good on you, man.
Thanks. Yeah, no, just a big thank you for Michael. Michael does a lot of work to put these things on and promote them and make sure he keeps everyone together. So thanks, Michael.
And if anyone wants to work, they can always come and help us in the embassy too.
Yeah, there you go. Hi everyone, Andrew Kavasalis. I don't know if any of you were here yesterday. I kind of spoke about, not so much negative aspects of what's really going on around cannabis, but like Luke touched on before, governments and media love to report that medical cannabis is legal, and it's obviously not, and we've got a long way to go. We've been doing these things for a while now, and what I used to talk about was, where are we actually in terms of research on medical cannabis? What is medical cannabis? Is medical cannabis like what's happening in the US and Canada, where primarily it's just people smoking high THC cannabis? Or is medical cannabis more like what our government's talking about, pharmaceuticalised cannabinoid medicines? I'm going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, what's really going on. We refer to a lot of medical cannabis research that people do, their own research. We refer to Dr. Google. When we talk about you can't believe everything you read, I see a big lack of judgment there on a lot of people who promote medical cannabis, and they'll sprout these any number of research papers, or that's something they've read on Google or on the net, and there's some people who just won't doubt anything that they read about medical cannabis. And like the real research that's going on, there's a few things going on. So researchers around the world, whether it's cancer researchers or pain researchers, they've always been able to access medical cannabis in terms of individual cannabinoids, pure delta-9, so THC delta-9, that means tetrahydrocannabinol delta-9. There's actually 10 deltas. There's delta 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then you've also got the different D grades. So in terms of delta-9, you've got THC delta-9A, THC delta-9, THC delta-9V. There's all these other variations, and then there's D grades. All these cannabinoids are quite close molecularly. The structure themselves is quite close to similar, and as they break down, once they've been harvested, and even cannabinoids mature on a plant, like if you pick a plant that's very young, the cannabinoids aren't as well developed. You won't have all the cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are in a resin gland on the outside of a plant, and they become mature and even turn a bit amber in colour. But the kind of research that interests me and really can be reflected into what medical cannabis is going around, people using different levels of illegal, predominantly high THC cannabis or CBD products at various strengths. So researchers around the world have always been able to access cannabinoids. And you read a lot of reports about, there's 146 studies that show that cannabis kills cancer, and you really look into that study, and it was done with an individual cannabinoid, usually at the most of the time it's done in vitro, in a test tube, and very rarely you see, animal studies, and even more rarely will you see a human study. So in terms of these studies, straight up in vitro, in a test tube, cannabinoids, individual cannabinoid with cultured cancer cells, sure, it might kill them, but so will bleach, so will celery seed extract, so will turmeric extract. But that doesn't mean taking high doses of celery seed extract or bleach is going to kill your cancer. And in fact, there's some studies that show that oral dosing of cannabis won't get into certain tumours. What we'll work up to is some of the really good research that's going on, and I suppose the root of some of the main stories about cannabis, especially cancer and cannabis. So a lot of people have heard of Rick Simpson, and if you read his story, he talks about he self-diagnosed himself with cancer and treated it. And during his talks, in his early talks, he talks about that the Spanish researchers had found a cure for cancer using cannabis. So and who these guys are, it's Manuel Guzman. The Manuel Guzman research people out of Spain have been doing some really good studies. And what they do use is individual cannabinoids. And what they did do a little while ago was got pure delta-9 and injected it straight into the brains of tumorous rats. They had aggressive tumours, genetically modified rats to display such. That's how we do medicines nowadays. And yeah, they saw a bit of a reaction, and they, rather than kill the rats outright, they saw a bit of a reaction. They did try it out on humans after that, 10 humans, and all those patients, they were terminal and they all died, but there was something going on. But then, of course, Rick Simpson said that, the Spanish found a cure. He diagnosed himself with cancer, used cannabis and cured himself. In response to that, the Guzman researchers have done YouTubes. That's why I'm saying people can look this up, because they've done YouTubes to explain to the people of the world that they didn't find a cure for cancer using cannabis, but this is what they did. And it's still remarkable enough, but then they also talk about the new research that they're doing. They're actually using purified cannabinoids, THC and CBD nowadays, in conjunction with chemo drugs. And they're finding very good results where the cannabinoids are protecting the healthy cells from these quite toxic drugs, chemotherapy drugs. And they're finding good research out of that. There's also very good research out of Israel nowadays. So the Israelis have been doing a lot of research, as I mentioned yesterday, for about 30 odd years. But every year, all their research has to be run by the DEA in the US. That's just how it is. Check it out. It's just how it is. That was yesterday's talk. But some of the stuff that they've done now, we've even had some of the Israeli researchers have come to Australia and give really good talks. There was Raphael Mushel, and he's like the godfather of cannabinoids and the research around that. But there's a couple of other researchers that have really come to the spotlight now. One in particular is a Dr. Deddy Merry. And we were down in Victoria last year at a big seminar at the Melbourne Convention Centre, and there he was. He had all these slides talking about all the research he's doing. So they're reverse engineering medical cannabis over in Israel, where people are using cannabis, not prescription. It's you get an approval from the health department and you're allowed to access cannabis from one of the legal growers. 6 of them in the country. But what the researchers over there are doing, are having a look at the person's condition, what sort of cannabis they're using, the way they're using it, and then, trying to find out the correlation about particular patient groups using this type of cannabis, and they're finding good results. So these guys are trying to pharmaceuticalise it as well, so they're going backwards and working out which cannabinoids are doing what. So people with different tumours, different cancers, melanoma, or even hereditary problems are able to run cell culture lines and put different cannabinoids in. They can do like 92 at a time. It's quite exciting stuff. But this Dr. Deddy had all these slides up and was explaining that some of the confounding things that they're finding, we can use this type of cannabinoid extracted in this particular way on this kind of cancer, and it cures it, or it stops it. But then if we use it on another kind of cancer, it doesn't do anything. But then if we have the same plant and we extract it in another way, it'll work on that other cancer. And so he was telling stories like this, and everyone was just enthralled. And then he said, and you know what, the more we find out about it, the more we actually don't know. The place stopped and just erupted in applause, because a lot of people in that crowd, myself included, had a good idea that we don't really know enough, and what we do know is quite confounding, especially when you offset that about on what's actually on the net and the generalisation of a lot of the benefits attributed to cannabis. So he brought the house down just with that. Here we had one of the best researchers in the world up there showing us all these, dazzling us with not only, he wasn't just talking about THC and CBD, he had a whole range of slides showing, two different varieties of cannabis with the same THC level, same CBD level. It's not working on this cannabis, but it's working on another one. But the only difference was, or the main difference was, this other minor cannabinoid was present in this variety, but not present in that one. Things like that was just totally blowing us away. So we kind of understand where we are on medical cannabis. It is confounding. I think that when I first started looking into medical cannabis, we were up to about 67 cannabinoids that were identified. I think the Israelis are up to 144 and still going. And that's just the cannabinoids. That's not the components, these other complex compounds that the plant produces. They're called terpenes. They're volatiles. They're expressed in what the smell of cannabis is. It's something like at the base of the resin gland, where the cannabinoids are. There's a little short silica spike that goes into the plant, but at the base of that resin gland, when you break it, that's where a lot of the terpenes are contained. That's why you crush a plant, a bud, before you smell it, and you really express those. They're volatile, so they're quite hard to contain and hard to capture, but in terms of the way we use cannabis, whether we smoke it or do an extraction, there's still extraction methods that can still hold those volatiles, and we still don't know whether terpenes influence or modulate the effects of cannabinoids, or whether they in fact express their own medical benefits or medical pharmacokinetics, what they talk about. So, the more we look into it, the more we don't know, and it's very hard when we're reading stuff on the net that says cancer cures cancer. I mean, what sort of cancer? I really like to read testimonials, and that really opened my eyes and helped me to come up with these kinds of thoughts. Is that when you read a really good a lot of the testimonials you actually read from people who have used it, especially in cancer and other conditions, but let's focus on cancer at the moment. These folk did have, they did do their surgery, they did do their chemo, but cannabis helped them. Some of them who went through multiple times had treated cancer, through normal methods, and then without cannabis, and then done it with cannabis. Amazing difference it had on them. We're seeing nowadays oncologists who are able to recognise which one of their patients is using cannabis during their chemo, whether the patient admits it or not. We're seeing a lot more acceptance also by the medical profession, as much as they can. They're not allowed, in Australia, they're not allowed to promote cannabis. They're not allowed to tell a patient to go and use cannabis, because if it comes down to the insurer, came up when Bob Carr here in New South Wales in the early 2000s really wanted to have a serious look at medical cannabis. One of the things that came up ultimately was the doctor's insurers. A doctor is only covered or given indemnity if he promotes or prescribes a product that's been clinically trialled in line with the manufacturer's guidelines. If that patient dies, and a lot of them do, as long as that drug was prescribed in accordance with those guidelines, the doctor's fine. Very, very, very rare, and you will all be aware of that, but very, very rare a doctor will ever be in trouble as a result of a patient dying from prescription drugs or anything attributed to those prescription drugs. So, what we do know about cannabis is still very sketchy. You can't believe everything you read, and I think that everyone accepts that, but I just find it quite disheartening when it comes to cannabis that a lot of people who want to promote and advocate for cannabis will just say the most outlandish things. I think cannabis is a very superior drug and a very superior set of compounds that are very beneficial for the human body. We have systems that are perfectly tuned, whether it's just from hemp seed food, which just happens to have this perfect balance of omega-3, 6 and 9 for the human body. It just happens to have all 11 essential fatty acids that the body doesn't make. It just happens to have a full array of vitamins and minerals for the human body. Same with cannabinoids. We just happen to have this whole endocannabinoid system that is perfectly in tune with different components, different illnesses in our body, and we can add what they call phytocannabinoids. That's the ones that are produced in a cannabis plant. Our body produces endocannabinoids. That's what work on these in the endocannabinoid system. But phytocannabinoids are what we get from the cannabis plant, we can introduce into the body, and it'll stimulate, and there's receptors especially for it. Talking about research, there's a researcher down in... Australia has some great cannabis researchers, have been for a while. Not these new ones that have just come up now, they're all ex-addiction specialists. I don't want to mention their names, but they kind of find themselves at the top of the heap in terms of medical cannabis advocacy. But when you have a look at the letters after their name and what they do, they're all addiction specialists. But no, we've got some really good ones. There's Dennis Rufagalis down in South Australia who discovered the vanilloid receptor on our endocannabinoid system, which is it's one that's got to do with pain, stimulated by cannabinoids. But not only that, when you stimulate this receptor, it kind of rejigs your opioid receptors. So you hear a lot of stories about people taking lots of opiates, slow release ones, it's still not working. They take Panadine for lollies or whatever. Their receptors are clogged up or whatever, they're not functioning properly. But a small amount of cannabinoids, THC or whatever, in that system, stimulating the vanilloid receptor will actually make opiates work better. So you're taking a very small amount of cannabinoids, like far less than would be psychostimulating, but it's also giving you opportunity to use less opiates, and your opiates are working better. So that's the kind of research, there's researchers here and around the world who are starting to put two and two together. Now, how that transpires from a doctor, a researcher finding the vanilloid receptor to turning that into, a product that can be prescribed, that's a very long distance apart. But we are on this long journey of discovering different things about cannabinoids. And so, but what is fantastic about cannabis is no one's ever died. There's no such thing as an OD, as a LD, a lethal dose of cannabis. So while we're experimenting, I think a lot of people are working out that cannabis is definitely not as bad as what they said in the propaganda for many, many years. We're having a look at the states in the US and Canada. The sky hasn't fallen in. Amsterdam the whole of the Netherlands for a very long time. Cannabis use has been going on for a long time. We're not seeing increased rates of schizophrenia and all these other problems, especially the problems we sort of have here in Australia with, alcohol use and other drug use and things like that. So yeah, people are realising now cannabis isn't that bad. I think the continual media churning of news stories about different people using cannabis and getting caught by the police, and cannabis is the only thing that helps them. I think that kind of churning of stories is also working to the psyche of Australia. What's not converting is to the politicians, and the politicians are really they're not even the top of the pops on this. Medical cannabis is a federal international issue. There really is. Here's a fact I forgot to drop yesterday, is there's no government in the world that has willingly introduced a meaningful medical cannabis regime. Just don't even think that any government has it. It's not happened in the US, it hasn't happened in even the Netherlands. It's still, not a really great regime that they have over there, and definitely not in Canada, as I was explaining yesterday. The High Court ordered the government to do that. So we're in a fortunate situation. Our government has willingly introduced laws, because that's all the government can do in terms of cannabis. No government, the Australian government definitely doesn't own cannabis, but what they can do is change laws to allow companies to develop these kinds of drugs. I think in the future, prescription drugs and drugs that have been developed from cannabinoids through the conventional methods will be used by a majority of people who will find benefit from using cannabinoids for medical purposes. I think it's safe to say that in the future less and less people will be smoking cannabis for medical purposes. They'll be using other drugs, but that's a long way to go. Price-wise and time-wise, I think they're the kind of obstacles and issues that we should be addressing. But certainly, I think if enough people don't believe that, whenever the government says it's legal, we don't believe that. We have a look for the detail around it. Certainly nowadays, your high-profile cannabis activists and advocates see through what the governments are talking about, and usually by the end of the day, the media will put a story out from an advocate, you know, who's read the details or the lack of details and is able to discount it. I think we'll know that the government's being serious about medical cannabis when they start talking about, you know, what they're going to do about the United Nations, how we're going to get around that. I think Canada's just shown that, you know, not a big problem. You know, we should be able to just tell the UN what we're doing and go ahead and do it, as long as it's a regulated approach. I think, yeah, that's kind of where I, you know, wanted to leave people with. That there is a lot of positive research going on around the world. Don't believe everything you read. But on the other hand, cannabis, with no deaths recorded against it ever, I think we've got a long way to go. But also, it's you know, anyone who has a medical condition that they're not finding is helped by traditional medicine should be encouraged to use cannabis for medical purposes. And the more people using it, especially on the, rather than the black market, I think we should start referring to it as the medical cannabis alternate market in Australia. It's going gangbusters. Politicians are, you know, talking about medical cannabis all the time now, and the only place that you can really get it easily and cheaply is from the black market. So it's more like an alternate market that's developed around medical cannabis. So, you know, it'll build to the anecdotal evidence and hopefully spur governments to change laws quicker over the next year or two. Yeah, we're going in putting my hemp hat on. I'm from the hemp party. We going into the next election. I think we'll try and get. It'd be great if one of the parties, one of the majors, Labor or Liberal, said that you know, within 12 months of winning the next election, we will have a functioning, meaningful medical cannabis regime that's been developed in conjunction with user and advocacy groups, so we get it right, not what they've got at the moment, but an actual regime that's going to work and is going to help people now. I mean, we're talking about an increasingly significant number of Australians using cannabis every day for medical purposes, and we have to address their needs and concerns. And I think, you know, if we work towards a campaign that within 12 months after the next election, the government will introduce something like that, developed in conjunction with advocates. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And if anyone's got any questions, I might be able to help. Is Sista around? Yes, Sista!
One anecdotal thing. My dogs, I've got a poodle, 13 years of age, became a diabetic 3 years ago. 18 units per day on insulin. Since we started giving him 2 drops a day, as does his little sister, which is a toy poodle, gets 2 drops a day. His insulin intake has dropped by half. I was able to drop it from 18 units a day.
18 units a day to 9 units. There is your anecdotal evidence. Yeah. That's what it does for our pets. Don't we owe it to our loved ones? And tell all our diabetic kids and stuff. Try it, for God's sake. Yeah. That's what I mean by sharing the knowledge we have with each other, because only that way are we going to be successful.
Yeah.
As a community. Thank you.
You're right. All right. I think that might be about it for the day too. Is there any other speakers? Oh, Howard, another question here.
Which is the party most likely?
Which is the party that are most likely to support medical cannabis? Out of the 2 major ones, Liberal and ALP.
I think it's very important to remember only a government can change laws, not the hemp party or the Greens or One Nation. Only a government can do that. And no government in the world has done it, so it's going to be pretty hard for even a state government.
But wouldn't it be a smart thing for a government to stand up and say, listen, I've got the balls to do this?
Well, South Africa's done something.
It would be smart, but you've got to understand there's a lot of forces that don't want this to happen. There's a lot of forces
I
that...
understand that.
Yeah, if you... Look, anyone, have a look at the Google top 200 entities of the world and you'll find them. They're all pharmaceutical companies. They have more money than most countries. They have a direct pipeline into every government's GDP through their health budgets, and it's expanding. They own all the drugs. You know, look, here's the thing that really does my head in. This whole thing about, you know, Western countries like us calling for medical cannabis, 85% of the world's population don't even have access to pain relief. It's too expensive for them. We grow half the world's opium. If we go into the UN Drug Convention, there's the 80-20 rule. In recognition that opium comes from the Middle East, it's there in black and white, the 80-20 rule. 80% of the world's opium will be grown in these two, in India and Turkey. We're growing half the world's opium here. How did we get away with it? And we aren't, it's two foreign companies that own it. We make about $300 million from it. You know, no other country's been able to do it. There's a lot of force. Uruguay, they're a non-aligned country. They said they were going to do medical and recreational. They've been kind of able to do recreational. They've not been able to crack medical.
It's because of Big Pharma.
It's Big Pharma, yeah. And then even, you know, I see on social media people having a go at these medical cannabis companies, which I might declare I'm involved in one, calling them Big Pharma. We're not. There's Big Pharma and there's Little Canna. We're down here. And for us to even think that the world has left the door open for Australian companies to develop pharmaceuticalised prescription cannabinoid medicines is a very big call, but it's enough to be positive about. I mean, for me and our company, my company, Can Global, we're just about to, or QBL or MCL, Medical Cannabis Limited, the companies that I'm involved with. You know, we are on a good footing, but yeah, it's Big Pharma and the kind of rules and the kind of pressure they're able to exert right down to a state level, whether it's, you know, they're pulled through the Royal Association of GPs or the AMA or the Health Department, the TGA. You know, we've had so many parliamentary inquiries. The TGA has given evidence under oath or under privilege. They are not paid by the government. They are paid, the TGA run on contributions or application fees from pharmaceutical companies who want to introduce drugs. Their job is not to introduce drugs per se, just to test the drugs that companies are applying to develop. So, you know, and that's all around the world, it's not just here. That's why we're in that situation. Yeah, so some of the simplest solutions, you know, they're just not that simple. I mean, the first question I always ask myself, well, why hasn't any other country done it? You know, whether it's on a human rights issue at the UN level or why hasn't anyone else, you know? So we're still in a good spot here. In Australia, we've got a bit of mongrel about us, a bit of civil disobedience, and I think that's what we're really seeing now. But yeah, the whole thing about, you know, we've got all the opiates, you know, we can go to a doctor. Until the other month, we were able to get opiates and pain relief over the counter, stuff that 85% of the world cannot afford. I mean, you try to go to the Middle East with endone or something like that, you better have some certification with you because you could end up as a drug trafficker. They're so heavily stigmatised as well. And these are through foreign forces, relatively new forces, 80 or 90 years old, whereas these countries were producing opium for a long, long time, you know. Yeah, so... Yeah, don't get me started. Yeah, I get pretty upset about it. And that's something that does niggle me a bit. Yeah, there is a lot of white privilege that we're, you know, us Westerners now, we've got all the, you know, 85% of the opium or pain relief in the world, and now we want medical cannabis as well. Yeah,
and it's not until you get a trigger like you're about to lose a child through cancer. Yeah. And you think to yourself, so, you know. So over the last 3 to 4 months, we're growing our own. Yep. We're going to extract our own oil. Yep. We're going to feed it to our people. Yep. And, you know, about, you know, researching what strain of cannabinoids in here and what this cannabinoid does and what that cannabinoid does. Who gives a rat's ass if the whole thing...
Yeah, it's exactly right.
If the whole thing does something to your body. And you were mentioning before that this person had this cannabinoid and it fixed his cancer, but it wouldn't fix that cancer.
Oh, no, that was in vitro. In vitro. No, not in people. No.
Okay, sorry. Yep.
Confounding stuff. This is... Researchers going, the more we find out, the more we don't know.
Yeah. So for mine, I don't care what does what. If it's in this thing, I don't want it extracted.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I know. I mean, look, we're just about to conduct another survey now, which, you know, people are a lot more educated about cannabis now. And you know, I know there's a lot of parents out there who didn't want to put, who are using, you know, black market cannabis for their child, they don't want to put their kid on a clinical trial using Epidiolex, because what about if their kid got the placebo, or what about if that product didn't work for their child? You know, really big issues around that. And we're also seeing, there was a study done out of the Lambert Initiative, the Pelican study, where they specifically, and this is very difficult to do for researchers, so they got samples of the black market product being used by children with epilepsy, so they had the parents bring this stuff in. This is all otherwise highly illegal, but they had to get special permits to do this. And the researchers, you know, they were looking for anything but THC. And when they had a look at these, now, medical cannabis in Australia is made from high THC cannabis extract, and usually supplied in different dosages. The researchers' first comment was, oh, these products that we tested, we found very little CBD in. The backstory is that you've got a company, you know, GW Pharmaceuticals and Bayer trying to do a CBD product, Epidiolex, for kids. So the researchers here in Australia said, oh, and acted surprised that we found none of these products had CBD in it. But we found THC in it, and we're going to have to look further into these products to see what other cannabinoids are in there. That's the kind of stuff we're on now. But researchers at the moment, you know, University of New South Wales, is, you know, they're giving out like $3 million for some researchers to have a look at CBD. They came to Nimbin looking for the folk who are smoking the CBD cannabis. Just outlandish. No, people smoke high THC pot. That's what we do. So, you know, the CBD thing, you know, like I was talking about, you can't believe everything you read. There's a lot of criticism about CBD. There's a lot of, and people should, you know, have a look at it and you know, analyse it and you know, rationalise it for yourself. But what we do know is what you're pointing out. What medical cannabis is the use of high THC cannabis as a whole extract, and at different levels. That's basically it in a nutshell. We don't know enough about it to be talking about pharmaceuticalising it and putting it in pills and caps and this and that just yet. But suffice to say, are really handy interim measures until for the next 10, 15, 20 years before companies do that, and it's offered to the wider community by doctors safely prescribing it and actually creating benefit for the patient. Who cares whether it's whatever? Yeah, well, we definitely know it's not going to be smoking it, you know. So, you know, we've got a long way to go. There's going to be upheavals within even the cannabis community about how it goes. But yeah, what you're talking about is right, but how we get there is sort of the main thing, yeah.
So I just wanted to say something. So what we do know is that when anyone has THC or CBD, any kind of cannabis in their system, if they've never had it before, it actually switches on this endocannabinoid system. It actually starts it moving. And so that helps to go for homeostasis, which means you're trying to balance your system. So it just happens with any kind of THC or CBD intake. Right at the beginning, it switches it on. And so we get the cannabinoids that we need to live out of our mother's breast milk if we're lucky enough to get it. And so failing that, we go for goat's milk. That's the traditional way, so that the babies can get actually switching their endocannabinoid systems on. That's what it's actually about.
It's putting it in perspective. I keep reminding, what's the scale for chilies? Is it the Scoville scale or something? Scoville? That's a receptor on the endocannabinoid system. They actually can measure it. They can measure its reaction and able to quantify, you know, like chili strength and stuff like that. And yeah, so we'll find bits and pieces, like I was explaining about Professor Dennis Rufagalis, who found the vanilloid receptor. So, you know, yeah, there's a lot more and more coming out. But you speak to any doctor and they'll say, yeah, we never learned anything in medical school about the endocannabinoid system. It was never spoken about. Yeah. Anyway, I saw Radic around a minute ago. He's going to do a demonstration, which is always a bit of a hoot.
Radic.
Here he is.
Thank you every day for my dog.
Roof. There's a great ad on. Oh, I don't know. It's yeah. Again, can't believe everything you see on the internet. But yeah, somebody's done a video about medical cannabis for a dog, and there's this golden lab. And it just shows you like all these different scenes where it's kind of tripping over, but you know, singing the praise of medical cannabis. The dog looks like he's having a good time, but he just stumbles a bit. But it finishes off with the dog just sitting there on the grass, and somebody chucked a ball and it just doesn't even respond. Anyway, it's medical cannabis.
We've got our heads prominent in the country.
Whereabouts?
In the house.
Which house?
But we've got geckos.
Yeah.
And you know how fast they are.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't catch them. They're in the duck. I don't put this gecko. I thought it must be dead on the floor.
Yeah.
So I give it
I've given this gecko a bit of a tweak, and it's opened his eyes and looked at me, and I thought, oh, here's a chance to get rid of this bastard, you know. So I grabbed it and I put it out on the lawn. I reckon he was stoned. I reckon he might have been eating the bloody leaf. Possibility? That's the story I'm going
Yeah,
with.
I don't know. Yeah, don't believe everything you read and half of what you hear. I don't know. I love geckos. I wish I... Yeah, I know how hard they are to catch, yeah. Yeah, if you're relocating them from somewhere else to take them home, yeah. Yeah, yeah, but geckos in your house, mate, means, you know, in some places it's a happy house. Good on you. Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone. Hang around for Radic. He's going to be cooking up the storm.